Hello, hello. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write, where I give questionable writing advice through running metaphors. And before we get started, thank you, Richard. Thank you, RC. Thank you, Cool Gamer, for all joining in. I have been messing with my audio. I've been going back and forth. I did a pre-recorded episode yesterday, so please let me know if my sound sounds off. Hopefully, not higher than 25, in my opinion. So I'm at max. It's weird, but I record live at maximum. I pre-record at about 20. So yeah, between the two different tools, just let me know if I get too loud. Hey, Felicia, thanks for joining in. And let's see, starting off. So I've been promoting a local library event, a local event where I was doing a book signing at a local library. That went okay. I sold one book, which, obviously I would have loved to have sold more, but hey, one book is still one book. And it was a free event at a local library, so I didn't travel to get there. I hung out, met some other fun authors, and had a pretty good lunch. They had Korean tacos. They had three different food trucks. And there was a Southern style, there was a barbecue one, and there was a Korean food truck. And so I went to the Korean taco place and had some great food there. Now, all in all, this is a learning experience, and so I'm definitely planning on going back to this same thing next year, assuming they have it. And I am planning to use this as a springboard for the next upcoming in-person events. Also, the romance author I interviewed 2 weeks ago, Lori Thorne, has set up her own podcast to interview other indie authors. Now, if you're interested in sharing your stories, and possibly if you are trying to promote your own book, or if you have something that's coming out soon, then definitely be sure to sign up and volunteer to be interviewed. I've included a link in the description below, so check it out if you're interested. She's awesome. She's a lot of fun. We had a lot of great conversations in the lead up to the interview, and then the interview itself was a whole lot of fun. So hopefully you all are. Yeah, Richard, that would actually work because she writes some very spicy material. I just finished the second one, so that is locally loved, not remotely loved is the first book, locally loved is the second. I finished the second one. That was what she was on this channel talking about 2 weeks ago. And anyways, if you're interested, link is in the description. The link is in the description below, so please check it out. I cannot recommend her enough. I'm sure her channel is really, or her podcast that she's just starting off looks really interesting. So, go do. Anyways, tonight I am talking about outliers. How do we write outliers? I'm sorry, I'm very flustered right now. Today was a fun day at work, and yeah, I had a spontaneous internal interview, so that was always stressful. Thank you, sweetie. Yeah, I we all have some of those books like that, but let me back up for a moment. What is an outlier? They are, plainly put, exceptional. They stand alone among a sea of quote unquote normal. They're a fun meme for anime of Spot, the protagonist, because they stand out. Whether they have crazy hair or exaggerated muscles which far exceed their peers, they're easy to recognize in any given scene because they look so different from everyone else. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that was fun. No, yeah. We don't need to go into too many of the details, but basically I got called into a meeting, spontaneous meeting, and then there was like a line of people just asking me questions. And yeah, the guy who set up the meeting actually apologized because he was not expecting that to happen. So all fun. Anyways, back to tonight's topic. We inherently root for many outliers because we sympathize with them. Everyone has felt like an outsider at some point, whether we're walking into a room and we know no one, or we move across town to have to find new friends at a new school. I felt like an outlier when going away to college, and years later, as I forged for myself as an adult, or when I newly entered the working workforce. We experience the same hardships that make us universally feel like outliers, even if the specifics vary. And yes, thank you, Richard. Normal is boring. And yes, loving the support here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I would argue that everyone on this planet has at one point felt like an outlier. And my wife, in discussing this episode and writing it, or actually, she gave me a whole bunch of ideas for topics to give on this channel, and we were trying to funnel them through into something that I would willingly talk about and something that I have good experience on, and recognizing, yes, all of high school is very everyone feels like an outlier in high school. Anyways, these were her descriptions for my characters. I didn't plan it that way, but these were the types of characters that I wrote. So Tracy is an outlier for being a high school girl with lots of confidence. Again, these are her words, not mine. Adriana showed examples of how another character, Derek, is a cis white man who continually second guesses himself. In most of the other stories she reads, those traits are not common for typical similar characters in other stories. Outliers can be neutral in that they're neither good or bad necessarily. And it's a little ironic that outliers are used to balance a story. There's a perfect example, kind of. It's a nice little tangent, but it's a baklava story. I think I might have told this story before, but in general, I am fairly orderly and systematic and have a reasonably good memory. Unfortunately, my baklava story is an outlier because the one time where those traits worked against me. While my wife and I were on vacation, we went back to the hotel room to check out. We were leaving the hotel room, and I went back in to check and make sure that my wife and I didn't leave anything. I got down on the ground, checked under the bed, I checked in the closet, I checked under the little dresser thing, even though we never used that. But anyways, I checked everywhere, and I want to make sure that we had no cables or socks or anything that fell beneath the bed or was just anything important that wasn't lost. But there was one problem. When I went back into the hotel room, I was carrying fresh baklava that we picked up to enjoy at the airport. And our stuff will be under the bed because there are plenty of cables, and like I have definitely lost cables under you have like your bedside your charging cables, they just end up everywhere. I stop questioning how things end up wherever they are. But yeah, those frequently end up just all over the room. So I am no longer surprised when I find a cable anywhere. So I was just checking to make sure that we didn't leave anything like that. Anyways, I didn't even think about how I automatically just put it down the chair, and then I got down, looked on the floor to make sure there was nothing there. And so when I got back up, I left without it. In other words, in checking that we left nothing, I left a dessert that I was going to enjoy later. Well, my wife and I were going to enjoy later. And she still makes fun of me for that one because it's an outlier, as it's not usually a mistake I make. Normally, I am very aware of what's going on around me. I am aware of everything that I need to take to the airport. I'm aware of all the items in our room. But she also points out that this meets the definition of irony, even though I'm usually the one quoting the song ironic when it doesn't really apply. No, Richard, this isn't a spicy story, so sorry to disappoint. Also, that was some of the best baklava I've had in my life, and I really do regret missing that extra helping because that would have been such a fun way to send off the vacation while we were staying in the airport. Now, number one on writing outliers. My first tip is to not be blatant. Don't name the highly valuable mineral MacGuffin unobtainium, just to throw a random example out there. One of the few faults in the show Wednesday is that it felt like it wanted to be a show about outliers. The school even had the title of For Outcast, which smacked the audience in the face with its theme and plot. Even among them, Wednesday stands out, making her an outlier among outliers. Subtlety is much more effective writing tool than, say, a sledgehammer. When blatant outliers hit us over the head, it feels less special because they were trying too hard, or rather, the writer or the character playing them was trying too hard. To pull down the show heroes, one of the villain's ideologies is that when everyone is special, no one is. His logic is fundamentally flawed, especially in his case, because he was accumulating every power and was significantly better than everyone else. That was the whole problem. Everyone needed to combine together to defeat him. But that one phrase in itself is kind of right. When everyone is an outlier, then no one is. When everyone on a show has some special quirk, then no one does. Or some are certainly better attuned to the situation than others. And if nothing else, it gives each individual outlier less meaning. Like Wednesday would be a completely different show if it took place in a regular high school instead of isolating her among monsters and werewolves and all types of other things. Now, number two, don't make a character with the personality of, say, a table, i.e., flat. When a character's trait is that they're weird, well, what does that mean? On Wednesday, there was a character, her specifically, who had other interests. She had a personality. She liked to paint. She was compassionate to a degree, and especially towards her friends. She was great at fencing. She was inquisitive. Going back to that whole compassion thing, she tried, but she routinely failed to relate to other people because she had some kind of disconnect in how they felt emotions, or she buried them so deep that she couldn't relate to other people until they sort of broke through. However, when a character's primary trait is that they're an outlier, in my opinions, they and the story surrounding them tends to lack substance. The story becomes less about a hero's journey, or say the cat, or insert whatever template you're trying to use, and more about that character, that outlier, finding acceptance. That is a great point. Yeah, I would argue that, yeah, Wednesday, that character was definitely borderline on the spectrum, or at least that's how she was trying to portray it. And a lot of times when their primary trait is that they are an outlier, then that character tends to, despite what they say within the confines of the story, they often openly reject the moments where they could find acceptance. Now, going the other way, Wreck It Ralph is an example of doing this right, where you have an outlier who has a lot of personality. He's a villain, a bad guy, and he stands out from the other characters around him. This leads him on a journey of acceptance. More than that, he grows outside of his grumpy personality to become worthy of acceptance. He still is the same Wreck It Ralph grump at the end, but at the beginning, he had become the monster the other characters feared. And that was sort of his own defense mechanism. They were rejecting him, so he started rejecting them and becoming the monster of the video game that he was a part of. By the end of the story, he learned some valuable lessons and he accepted himself first, and then everyone around him, well, they liked him. He stopped being intentionally grumpy to them, and they found the personality that we had grown to love through the movie. So once he learned to accept himself, then everyone else accepted him. If he still treated those around him as he did at the beginning, at the end, so if he were still grumpy, if he were still mean, if he were still trying to intentionally antagonize them, and his personality remained the same, I wouldn't care about the story. So to summarize, I think we should create fully realized characters who happen to be outliers and have them grow and change throughout the story. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I think there is stories about acceptance work, but if that is the entire goal of the character, then the story is not as interesting towards me. And that's just my own opinion. Um, I can't remember. There's definitely a show or a movie or something that I watched where that was the primary goal of the character, and I just kind of thought it was less. That the story itself was boring, and that the Um, yeah, exactly. Stories need additional facets. Thank you. You are you're conveying my ideas better than I can. I think, well, going on a slight tangent, I did not enjoy Guardians of the Galaxy 3 primarily because it didn't really have much of a plot. And what plot was there was driven forward by trauma of one specific character who we all saw, but none of the other characters really did. So he kind of remained stagnant and whatever. Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is not very good. A lot of the characters remain flat. And that's all I'm going to waste considering that movie. Question: do you think the outliers should be the centerpiece of the story? Yeah, absolutely, they can. It depends on the story itself. So if your main character is the outlier, great, whatever. If your main character has a plucky sidekick who is the outlier, whatever. That's whatever works within whatever story you want to tell, go for it. And yes, absolutely. In fact, behind me, let me see if I can do this. It's underneath some books. Yeah, this one. Elantris. You have at the heart of it, there's a love story, and you do absolutely have an autistic side character who doesn't really play much of a role throughout the story, but they come in at the end in a very big way, and it really works well with the magic system. So, yeah, Brandon Sanderson obviously is a fantastic writer. He wrote a side character involving an autistic character which had a great story payoff at the end of the book. Yeah. So moral of the story, read Elantris if you haven't. It's a lot of fun. It's not that big of a read. I guess I just saw it's less than 500 pages. A lot of Brandon Sanderson's I don't necessarily like because they start to ramble, but this one feels a lot more tight and well knit. Whereas I don't necessarily like a lot of Brandon Sanderson's that extend into multiple books because he does write doorstops. So my personal opinion is I don't know. Brandon Sanderson is a stunningly incredible author, but I have mixed feelings about enjoying his works. And apparently there is some Parks and Rec references, which I don't get because I did not watch all those episodes with you. And yeah, I've only watched. My knowledge of Parks and Recreation is very piecewise, where I watch like an episode and have no context for what it is. I would basically watch them whenever Adriana was watching them, so it was very. Yeah, that is a true statement. I have not watched Parks and Rec all the way through. I've watched a couple of episodes here and there. Usually, when Addie was watching them, I would sit there and watch them in the background. Thank you for looking past all my flaws. Now, number 3, consistency. If a character has a if a character has a quirk or is quote unquote weird or whatever about them that makes them an outlier, it should always be present or whenever it applies to the story. Unless they're explicitly pretending to be something they aren't, which has its own issues, but there are a lot of scenes where somebody might pretend to be how they perceive to be normal, or they might be in disguise, or there are plenty of story reasons why somebody would intentionally try and hide who they are. But that is that's its own common story trope and beat. But either way, they should remain consistent unless they're actively trying to be in disguise. Now, I hate reading a book where a character is introduced by doing X, and then we're told they do X every time. Then during some pivotal moment when X should be a factor, they don't, either because the author forgot or because it would be too complicated to write. In those situations, the characters felt more like stand-ins for the author to perform a task than a real person. That breaks the immersion of the story for me. And number 4, above all else, remember our characters are people or aliens or living beings or whatever form they take, and we write. Like every character, Give them goals and ambitions. Maybe create some scenarios where the traits which define them as an outlier are put to the test in the form of their choices or are pivotal to resolving the conflict in the story. I wasn't planning on praising Elantris, but yeah, here we are. It's not the best example, but there was a Futurama episode from classic Futurama, which was that will all from my standpoint, that will always stand the test of time and is a enjoyable watch minus that one really, really depressing episode. But there was a scene where Fry got addicted to Slurm, which is the Coca-Cola slash Willy Wonka stand-in. And he has to keep drinking it because he's addicted to it. But he needs to save Leela, and he can't do both. Except he does. He drags a trough of Slurm over so that he can hit a switch and free her from whatever trap that was going on, all while drinking from the trough. And he's able to accomplish his goal despite the momentary outlier. It's not the best example given the other comparisons we made in tonight's episode, but it does work for the point where he has goals, he has a temporary outlier, an issue with himself, and that he's addicted to Slurm, and he is able to work through that problem to save the woman he loves. And lastly, number 5, limited use. I'm going to give an example from the series which cannot be named. Sorry, the series which must not be named, but it still is. It's such a great example that I want to include it here. Now, Luna Lovegood is a fantastic character, and she works so well because she's used in moderation. We want more scenes with her and them, and that should be a writer's goal. Leave readers wanting more. Much like that point, I have nothing else to add. Those are my 5 tips to infuse our characters with unusualness to make them realistic and fun and bring life to our stories. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write. You can find me on Twitter or X and Instagram. I posted, I think I did at least one image from this past weekend at the library. I guess I can start posting more food pictures, but mostly it's running and writing thoughts. So be sure to follow me and join in with your own thoughts. And let me know in those comments whether you have your own quirks or how you create characters with them or make your characters outliers without having them be overbearing or break continuity. And don't forget to sign up for the Running to Write monthly newsletter if you want regular updates on my sort of musings, pitfalls, and lessons learned. See you next time. Until then, write those quirky and lovable characters.